I passed away during the year I was head over heels for him. Jake had me locked up in the basement for an entire day and night, all to keep his pure moonlight company. Eventually, a short circuit sparked a blaze, and I choked to death inside. In my final seconds, I caught sight of a kid who was desperately breaking the door lock with a bench, sprinting towards me. The fire singed his clothes, but he didn't even flinch. Who was he? My memory's hazy. All I remember is dying in his embrace. After I died, my spirit stayed close to the boy. The flames intensified, but he clung to me, not budging. I tried pushing him, roaring, "Run! Are you just gonna stay here and die?" But I knew he couldn't hear my ghostly screams. Then the fire truck roared in, and a squad of firefighters hauled him out in a frenzy. Finally, I escaped that damn basement. Outside, the sun was shining bright, and it was a gorgeous day. I saw Jake pacing nervously outside the house. He grabbed someone and asked, "Has the girl from the basement been pulled out?" Oh, he still had no clue I was dead. See, the kid I had a crush on for 10 years never dared to rush in to save me, even when the flames surrounded me. My body was still tightly held in his arms. He ignored everyone and headed straight for a black car. He opened the door and placed me in the passenger seat. He even thoughtfully buckled the seatbelt around my lifeless body. Then the car sped off, leaving the neighborhood. The boy was fleeing with the dead girl, like something straight out of a movie. We left the city behind. The landscape slowly changed to fields, small towns, and eventually beaches. He reached the ocean, a deserted, untouched shoreline. Finally, the car stopped. He carried me out, walking slowly into the water, sinking together with me. He said, "Amelia, I'm Leo. Do you remember me? Are you about to spill your feelings?" I opened my eyes to find myself standing in a high school classroom, surrounded by classmates who were 17 or 18. A girl shoved me, asking, "Amelia, is that a love letter you're holding?" In my hand was a crumpled piece of paper, the envelope clearly marked, "For Jake." I had traveled back to the day I confessed my feelings to Jake in high school. It was a Friday afternoon, right before school ended. In 5 minutes, Jake would walk into the classroom. I was about to give him this love letter in front of everyone. What did he say then? Oh, he said, "Sorry, I'm not looking to date right now." No, I shook my head. You've got it all wrong. So, at that moment, Jake walked in through the classroom door. Someone yelled, "Jake, Amelia wants to talk to you." With a curious tone, I tore the letter in half, calmly saying, "It's nothing, we're just messing around." After that, I tossed the shredded paper into the trash. Jake stared at me for a long moment. He didn't say anything and went back to his seat. The crowd of onlookers sighed in disappointment. I thought there'd be some drama. Let's bounce, I thought. I flipped through my book at my desk as the end of school approached, everyone eagerly packing their bags. But I vaguely remembered there was something else. Maybe it didn't seem important back then, so I buried it deep in my memory, until the homeroom teacher walked in, snapping me back to reality. It was him. When the students saw the homeroom teacher enter, they immediately stirred, whispering complaints. "Teacher's here," they murmured. "What time is it? School's almost out." The teacher frowned. Our school was a private institution, considered elite, and the students here were all either rich or powerful, making it tough for him to manage. The teacher waved to someone outside. "Come in." Leo walked in through the classroom door. I remembered. He was the transfer student who came to our school in his senior year from another city. He always wore faded school uniforms and carried an old, beat-up backpack, completely different from the flashy style of the other students. Maybe because of this, he rarely talked to anyone and was often isolated. He usually sat in the last row, working through practice exercises by himself, yet his grades were stellar, consistently ranking in the top 3, especially in physics, where he almost always nailed full marks. Leo leaned forward and introduced himself. "I'm Leo. I transferred here from the neighboring East City." The teacher nodded. He pointed to a seat in the back row and said, "You can sit there." So Leo walked to the back of the classroom with his backpack, sitting behind me. He slowly took out his textbook and neatly arranged it on his desk. He seemed a bit anxious and confused, but that was all right. At 17, we still had time and a chance to start fresh. After the teacher left, the classroom buzzed again. Everyone turned to check out Leo. Mike, the class troublemaker, approached and asked, "East City, that coal mining town next door?" My family does business there too. What's your dad's name? Maybe my parents know him. Leo fiddled with his fingers, looking a bit flustered. He stammered, My dad doesn't do business, he just, is he a coal miner? Mike jumped in, laughing. People here learn to look down on others from a young age, preferring wealth over anything. Curiosity drew others in closer. Mike became even more smug, picking up Leo's book and holding it to his nose. I can really smell coal. Ha 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 ha! The nasty laughter echoed. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and splashed water from my cup onto Mike's head. Is your nose a dog's nose, Mike? Soaked Mike glared at me in anger. He rolled up his sleeves, glaring at me. Amelia, you looking for trouble? Sorry, but I've really been dead. Maybe high school Amelia was shy and reserved, but 28-year-old Amelia was not. I smirked. Yeah, looking for trouble. In the end, nothing happened. Jake came over frowning at me. What's up with you today? Go home. Jake was the class monitor, and Leo's family was the most powerful in East City, so Mike wouldn't dare mess with him. But when I saw him, all I could think of was the raging fire. It felt awful to be suffocated by smoke. I said, let's not go back together anymore. I want to stay after school to study for the college entrance exam. Jake scoffed. He looked at me weirdly. Amelia, what's gotten into you? I pointed to the classroom door. Could you please not disturb my studying, class monitor? The class beauty from next door, Catherine, is still waiting at the door for you. Jake, Catherine, and I grew up together. Our parents often did business together and frequently hung out socially. I used to think Jake was really good to me. He called me sister, but it turned out he only saw me that way. The one he liked all along was Catherine. Catherine waved to us from the door. Jake, what are you and Amelia talking about? Are you two leaving or not? Jake glanced at me again. He tapped my desk with his finger. You really can't handle physics? I can help you over the weekend. Then he picked up his backpack and walked over to Catherine. In the end, only Leo and I were left in the classroom. The clock on the wall ticked away. Behind me, Leo's pen scratched against the paper. My impression of him was always that of a serious, diligent student. But Leo, what do you see me as? I turned around, resting my hand on the back of my chair, studying him closely. His brows and the corners of his mouth slowly blended with the man who had held me in the fire. He said, Amelia, I'm Leo. Do you remember me? I must have been staring too hard as Leo sensed something was off. He looked up at me with a puzzled expression, rubbed his chin thoughtfully, and asked cautiously, Is there something on my face? I shook my head quickly and replied, No, it's so awkward. To break the tension, I casually pulled out a set of physics practice problems from the desk drawer, flipped to one page, and placed it in front of Leo. Can you help me explain this problem? Seeing the question, Leo immediately relaxed. He glanced at it and said, Well, this problem isn't too bad, but I still can't solve easy problems. I was terrible at physics, the type who dragged my scores down every exam. He took out a scratch paper and wrote down 2 formulas. It's just like this, and then this. Then he asked, Do you get it? I slowly nodded my head. He smiled and said, How about I help you build a foundation? Leo must have seen the confusion in my eyes and realized my true level. He closed the practice book, took out the textbook, flipped to the first chapter, and gently said, Let's start from the beginning and take it slow. I felt that Leo's tutoring skills were way better than my strict high school physics teacher, and definitely better than Jake. That's right, in my past life, I always trailed behind Jake, bothering him with all sorts of mistakes. Can you help me with the work energy theorem? Why can't I ever solve the last question on the math test? So annoying. No wonder he always shot me a cold look. Are you an idiot? You don't know anything. Until the school security knocked on the door, standing sternly at the classroom entrance, shouting at Leo and me, What are you two doing here so late? Why aren't you going home? Do I need to call your parents? Only then did Leo and I realize it was nearly 8 o'clock. The school was about to lock up. So we quickly packed our bags, apologizing as we rushed outside. We ran all the way to the school gate, where a car was honking beside me. The driver rolled down the window and called out, Amelia! It was the driver, our family's chauffeur. Seeing I hadn't gone home this late, He specially came to pick me up. Hurry up and get in the car. Your mom is waiting for you to have dinner, the driver said, giving me a stern look. I quickly opened the car door and turned back to Leo. Leo, it's late. Do you need us to give you a ride home? No, it's cool. My home is far away in the western suburbs, not on the way, he replied, showing that awkward expression again with a slightly stiff smile. Besides, there are buses at this hour. It's super convenient. Leo waved goodbye to me and ran towards the bus stop. The western suburbs are really far. The bus takes over an hour. I've only been there once and it's not fully developed. Everywhere is filled with old buildings and single-story houses, with trash piled on the ground. I called out to him, Leo? He turned back. I asked, do you know my name? Under the streetlight, his face flushed slightly. I said, my name is Amelia. You need to remember that. Although I had traveled through time, I didn't bring any high school academic knowledge with me. It's tragic. Plus, I was just an average student with a mediocre IQ, so I had to spend my weekends poring over high school textbooks at my desk. Almost every line was filled with notes. I'm not smart, but I've always worked hard. While I was struggling with the knowledge points, my phone suddenly rang, startling me. It was Catherine. She sent me a photo on WeChat. It was the library study room, a few books, and 2 cups of milk tea on the table. Her face showed discomfort. Amelia, Jake came to study on the weekend, and I'm not even a student focused on academics. It's so boring. Are you coming? Catherine is a dance major. Jake is really something. I never thought he'd choose to study at the library for a date. I simply replied with 2 words, not going. She didn't respond anymore. I continued reading. As I read, my brain felt like a mess. I really missed how clearly Leo explained things to me that afternoon. I opened my phone, downloaded the updated contact list from our class group file, found Leo's number, and called him. He picked up quickly. Is this Leo? Amelia, he asked hesitantly. I laughed. I was doing some problems and thought of you. Hope I'm not bugging you. We talked about a lot. We discussed which teachers in our class were the strictest, which were a bit snobby, and some long-standing campus tales and gossip that Leo had never heard before. He kept agreeing with me, occasionally exclaiming exaggerated surprise. It really satisfied my desire to share stories. This kid is really chill, but why can't I remember where we had crossed paths before? After chatting for quite a while, we hung up. I casually opened Instagram and scrolled through. I was shocked to see that Jake actually posted something for once. Reviewed some physics concepts today, learned quite a bit. The image was a corner of the physics practice book. There were a ton of likes and many comments from classmates. Teach me. Physics is really killing me. How did the genius get so serious? Jake, if you keep studying, you're gonna ace it. Please stop studying. Oh, before Leo transferred to our class, Jake had always been the top student, scoring way higher than the second place. It was only when Leo arrived that his position started to wobble. The 2 of them scored similarly on exams. They would take turns getting first and second place in quizzes. Other students always hoped to see a fierce competition between these 2 academic stars, but unfortunately, as far as I remember, the number of exchanges between Jake and Leo was probably no more than 10 sentences. The 2 of them were really not close. Feeling a bit guilty for having bothered Leo for so long, I decided to bake a box of cookies that evening as a gift for him. I used to love making these little treats. I'd even bring the cookies and cakes I experimented with to Jake for him to taste. But in my previous life, once I went to his office, I happened to see the cookies I had given him in his drawer. He had eaten only 1 piece. The rest remained untouched, and some had even gone stale. That's when I realized he didn't really like the things I made. My mom heard the commotion and came down to the kitchen to see what I was up to. Stop wasting food, she frowned. Jake doesn't even like this stuff. Can't you make something else? Who says these are for Jake? I'm giving them to my new classmate, I replied, puffing up my chest and answering loudly. That was pretty bold. My mom looked at me with surprise, exclaiming how I had changed. The next day during break, I turned around and placed the cookies on Leo's desk. He carefully opened the box and his eyes lit up instantly. Surprise, joy, and a bit of confusion. He said, Amelia, you're the first person to make cookies for me. It felt so good to have my efforts recognized. Just then, Jake walked by, holding a stack of papers, coming out of the teacher's office. He happened to pass our row, suddenly stopping in his tracks and looking at us, confusedly asking, "Did you make these cookies? Huh?" This guy always pops up out of nowhere, startling both Leo and me. Jake stared at the box of cookies for a moment, then said curiously, "Amelia, you said you wouldn't casually give away things you made." I scratched my head. I think I really did say that back when I was chasing after you in high school. Jake, no one else gets to eat the desserts made by me, Amelia. That love-struck brain of mine. Why did it have to expose me? I thought to myself, Leo is definitely not just anyone, and I didn't want to engage with him. Seeing that I wasn't talking to him, Jake turned to chat with Leo instead. "I heard you're doing well in physics." He casually picked a topic, placing the papers on the desk. Leo shook his head and responded humbly, "Not really, just average, no need to be so modest." Jake pulled out a test paper from the stack, handing it to Leo. "This score is pretty high. This is from the quiz you took when you transferred. I just went to the office to get last week's quiz paper and brought it back for you." I leaned over to take a look. Aside from losing a few points on the last big question, everything else was perfect. Jake pointed at the deduction and said, "This is a question from the physics competition. You should think about it some more." In my previous life, Jake had been getting tutored by an off-campus teacher to prepare for the physics competition and ended up winning an award, which even gave him extra points for the college entrance exam. Noticing that I was listening intently, he suddenly flicked my forehead. "Amelia, do you get it?" I glared at Jake, annoyed. "Don't bully me too much. Do you really think I won't improve?" He laughed, and surprisingly, his expression softened a bit. "Why didn't you come to the library this weekend? Didn't I say I would help you with the questions?" It was the first time I heard him say something like that, but I shook my head. "I can just ask Leo. He sits right behind me." Jake's expression stiffened. He glanced at me, then at Leo, said nothing, and coldly walked away with his exam paper. After taking a couple of steps, he turned back and said indifferently, "Amelia, you'll come to Catherine's celebration party next Saturday, right?" Catherine's celebration was a turning point that changed everything. Catherine was an art student, and the academic requirements weren't too high. As long as she met the criteria for the art exam, she was almost guaranteed a spot at a school. In my previous life, she performed exceptionally well. Several good dance schools extended offers to her. It was a huge deal. Catherine's dad hosted a feast at a 5-star hotel and even gave her 2 days off, allowing her to invite friends to celebrate. The only condition was that they weren't allowed to stay overnight. It wasn't surprising that her dad made such a request. She usually hung out a lot. Her friends came from all walks of life. Catherine booked a luxurious suite, and I went too. There were classmates from our school and some friends from her art classes. It was loud and chaotic. Jake and some friends from her art classes were in the middle. They were teased into singing duets. As it approached midnight, my mom called me via video. Catherine happened to be beside me and saw the caller ID. She said, "My mom said she went shopping with yours today and is probably still at your house playing mahjong. My phone is dead, so don't answer. She'll definitely use you to drag me back." Reluctantly, being the obedient daughter I was, I answered. Sure enough, 2 people appeared on the other end. My mom and Catherine's mom, Catherine's mom had a particularly loud voice. "It's so noisy over there. Catherine, don't you see what time it is? Are you coming home or not? Tell me where you are and I'll send the driver to pick you up." Catherine rolled her eyes in protest. "Mom, are you annoying? I just finished my exams and you let me have a night out. Am I missing an arm or a leg?" Both of them had stubborn tempers. After arguing for a while, Catherine's mom finally said, "If you don't come home tonight, don't even think about your allowance next month." Catherine was the little rich girl at school with a monthly allowance of 50,000 yuan. That statement made her shut up immediately. She cursed under her breath as she hung up, declaring that her night of freedom was over. Later, Jake accompanied us downstairs, waiting for the driver to arrive. During this time, Catherine hadn't said a word to Jake. She was a bit upset. While on the phone with her mom, she kept signaling to Jake, hoping he would come out and say a few words on her behalf, even just, "Don't worry, I'll take care of Catherine tonight." Catherine's mom really liked Jake and even had intentions of setting them up. If Jake had spoken up, he might have actually agreed to Catherine's request. But that night he remained completely cold, indifferent to Catherine's plea. In the end, Catherine couldn't argue with her mom and had to go home with me. "It's all your fault," she stomped her feet and gritted her teeth. "You two are no good. What a downer." And on the way home that night, we were in a car accident. The traffic police later concluded that our driver was driving under the influence and was fully responsible. Catherine and I lay in the hospital for half a month. Her injuries were more serious than mine. She had damaged ligaments in her leg and wouldn't be able to dance for years. Catherine's mom cried heartbrokenly at her hospital bed. She confronted the driver, insisting he pay with his life. The driver later faced legal consequences and had to pay compensation. But what good did that do? Catherine's family had plenty of money. This was a turning point. If that accident hadn't happened, Catherine would have stayed in the country, and the three of us would have continued our high school friendship. Years later, Jake might have ended up with Catherine. I would probably feel sad, maybe, but after crying it out, I would generously bless them and go on to find my own path in life. But that car accident changed everything. Catherine gave up on the dance academy and went abroad to study at an art school. Jake and I ended up in the same city for college, and occasionally we would run into each other. He knew I had a crush on him, but the thing he said most often was, "Amelia, do you think you deserve Catherine?" We were both wrapped in guilt. He would fly across the country to buy almond cookies for Catherine and send them to her abroad. He would also stay up late setting alarms to grab concert tickets, just to accompany her to the venue. As for gifts for holidays, birthdays, and anniversaries, he never missed a single one. Later, after living abroad for a few years, Catherine returned to the country. Jake found our old friends and threw her a celebration party. It got loud until dawn. After Catherine finished singing a song, she held the microphone and suddenly said to me, "Amelia, now that you've graduated for so many years, does your mom still care about what time you come home?" At that moment, the air went eerily silent. I knew she had never really forgiven me. Jake helplessly called out to her, "Catherine!" "Don't interrupt me." Catherine had drunk some wine, and her tone became rough. "Amelia, aren't you the good girl? Since you can't hang out with us anyway, why not lock you up in a little room? You'll be happier that way." She clung to Jake's arm, her voice sweet. I couldn't say a word. I wanted to argue, but it always felt like I owed her something. Jake sighed. He glanced at me, then took out his keys and, along with Catherine, locked me in the basement. I cried and shouted, but it was useless. I struggled, but it didn't help. Catherine patted the basement door and laughed. "Wait until I finish the party, and then I'll let you out." I didn't know why her party lasted so long. All I knew was that a fire broke out. In my past life's tragedy, now that I've crossed over, I won't let the same tragedy repeat itself. I knew it was almost impossible to stop Catherine from celebrating her exam success. I chose not to attend. If I didn't go, our driver wouldn't drive us there. On Saturday night, Jake called me. "When are you coming over?" It was noisy on the other end, and I barely heard him. "I'm not going, I'm studying," I said. "Suit yourself." After a brief silence, Jake replied coldly. I hung up the phone, thinking that my reputation as a diligent bookworm was officially spread. Around midnight, I went downstairs to check again. The driver was in the kitchen, video chatting with his old army buddies, drinking and chatting. He saw me and waved. "Amelia, why aren't you asleep yet?" I opened my mouth, hesitated, and finally said, "You're getting older. You should drink less." In the living room, several women were having a great time playing mahjong. Catherine's mom had just won a hand and was in high spirits. She glanced at the clock and suddenly remembered something. "Oh no, Catherine went out tonight. I wonder if she's back by now." I need to give her a call, but her phone was off. When she tried again, it still wouldn't connect. One of the girls nearby urged her, "It's your turn to be the banker. Don't tell me you're planning to run off with the winnings." Catherine's mom didn't try to call again. While shuffling the tiles, she laughed. "What are you all saying? Do you think I could cheat?" I lay in bed, watching the clock tick away slowly. Outside, everything was calm. It felt like an incredibly ordinary night. Slowly, I drifted into sleep. The next day, I was woken up by my mom. "Amelia, come down for breakfast." It was only 8 o'clock. Still groggy, I reached for my phone on the bedside table and opened Instagram, starting to scroll. A classmate had posted a story. School beauty and top student, a perfect match? The photo showed Jake and Catherine. They were both slouched on the sofa, eyes closed, with Catherine's head resting gently on Jake's shoulder. I guess the party must have ended late, and everyone was exhausted by the end. Someone caught a whiff of gossip and snapped a picture of them, even uploading it online. There were plenty of teasing comments below. I've noticed something was off between these two for a while. My favorite couple. Seeing the photo, I suddenly felt wide awake. I shot up from bed. The accident didn't happen. Catherine didn't leave the celebration. Everything was fine. I was so excited that I quickly liked the post. Then I commented, "This is awesome." In no time, when I refreshed the page again, the story had disappeared. Jake actually called me. "Amelia," he said out of the blue. "Last night got a bit wild, and I went to sleep halfway through. I didn't join in afterwards. What was he telling me that for?" He chuckled. "I thought you would go. If I'd known you weren't going, I wouldn't have gone either." I touched my nose, unsure how to respond. We fell into silence for a moment. I finally said, "If there's nothing else, I'm going to have breakfast." He replied, "See you at school tomorrow." Even though the photo on Instagram was deleted, the gossip spread quickly, especially since many classmates had attended Catherine's party that day. When I got to school on Monday, I could feel the buzz of private gossip swirling around. But I didn't join in, because in just a few days, we'd be getting the results of the monthly exam. This was Leo's first major exam since transferring. When our homeroom teacher announced the rankings, he built suspense. This time, there's a dark horse in our class. After all, competition leads to improvement. He paused. Leo, first in the grade. The classroom erupted. This was the first time Jake, who had always been first, was pulled down from the top. Leo, that transfer student, Leo, he doesn't even talk to us. With the college entrance exams coming, another top student shows up. Even though I already knew Leo's abilities, my excitement was uncontainable. I turned around and excitedly ruffled Leo's hair. "Leo, you're amazing." Leo's hair was left a mess from my excitement. He didn't seem angry at all. He just smiled gently. My deskmate must have found it unbearable and elbowed me. "Keep it down." She shot me a look. "Can't you see Jake isn't happy?" I followed her gaze to see Jake sitting against the wall, looking back at Leo and me. His lips were pressed into a thin line, his gaze icy as if he were about to freeze into a sculpture. I immediately felt a jolt. How insensitive of me. I mean, Jake had been first in the grade for almost 3 years. Suddenly dropping to second must be tough for anyone. And here I was, grinning away. Wasn't I just rubbing salt in the wound? I cleared my throat twice. I toned it down a bit. After a while, Jake finally shifted his gaze away from me. I let out a breath of relief. Thanks to Leo's tutoring, my grades had improved quite a bit. So now every Friday after school, I would voluntarily study for 2 more hours with him, benefiting from his help. But unexpectedly, Jake stayed behind too. As soon as the bell rang, Catherine rushed to her classroom door. "Jake, time to go home." She waved to him just like before. Jake didn't leave or pack his bag. He turned to Catherine and said, "You can head back first. I'll stay a bit longer to study, and then leave." Everyone who hadn't left turned to look. "Class monitor, you don't have to do this. You're already getting in with lower scores. You're really going to stress us out." Due to his competition wins, Jake's target school had lowered their admission requirements for him. Even if he didn't perform at his best, he definitely wouldn't fall below the cutoff for his ideal school. Jake ignored them. Once everyone had left, he just grabbed his books and sat next to me. I was a bit confused. Jake explained, "It's easier for us to discuss problems here since you're close to Leo." Wow, that left me speechless. Should I step aside and give the 2 top students some space? Before I could say anything, Jake pulled out a problem and started discussing it with Leo. "Leo, do you have a simpler method for this problem?" I think I'm overcomplicating it. I recognized it as a question I had gotten wrong on the exam, so I decided not to kick Jake out and just quietly listen to the 2 top students debate. I took advantage of the situation. After an entire evening of study, I felt like my brain cells were evolving. Jake and Leo's approaches to solving problems often differed, so their discussions often sparked new ideas. It wasn't until nearly 8 o'clock that Jake knocked on my head with his book and said, "Amelia, time to go home." I finally snapped back to reality. "Yeah, let's go." After I told my mom I would be studying at school after Friday classes, she had the driver come to pick me up 2 hours later. Leo insisted on taking the bus home and never let me give him a ride. This time, Jake joined us too. This wealthy second-generation heir didn't even have a car sent to pick him up. Jake rubbed his nose and shamelessly looked at me. "Why not have your family driver take me home? Didn't our families used to take turns picking us up after school?" I rolled my eyes at him. "Jake, can't you learn from Leo and take the bus home, contributing to energy-saving efforts?" Jake scoffed at my logic. "Should I call your mom and tell her you left me at school all night not caring if I got hurt?" I was truly exasperated. We sat in the back seat. The driver was quietly driving in front, and for a moment I found that I had nothing to say to Jake. The city's scenery slipped by, outside the window. Suddenly Jake asked me, "Amelia, there are only a few months left before the college entrance exams. Have you thought about where you want to apply?" That question reminded me. It was time to think about my application plans. I wanted to go south, to see the sea. But in my previous life, I had followed Jake to a northern university. It wasn't that the city was bad, just that it didn't suit me. Seeing me silent, Jake added softly, "When you decide, tell me." He took a deep breath, as if making a resolution, and looked at me. "I want us to go to school in the same city." I was caught off guard. "Aren't you already set on the university you're applying to?" I countered, "a top-tier school with lowered admission scores. More importantly, that school had many connections from Leo's family. Most of Leo's family friends and relatives had graduated from there, so he had no reason to change his target school now." He shook his head. He didn't answer my question, but just repeated, "Amelia, we need to be in the same city in the future." I wasn't interested in being in the same city as Jake. That night, I curled up in bed and texted Leo. "Leo, have you thought about which university you want to apply to?" After sending it, I felt the question was pointless. Considering Leo's grades, he could probably get into any school he wanted. Leo replied quickly, "Not yet. What about you?" I wanted. Leo replied quickly, "Not yet. What about you?" "I want to go somewhere warm, humid, where I can see the sea," I typed, imagining it as I went. Funny, so do I. This guy was clearly just copying me. In my previous life, I had worked hard in high school, but a lot of it was just to go to the same place as Jake. This time, I wanted to work hard for myself. As the second semester of senior year began, the atmosphere in our class gradually turned serious. The countdown to the college entrance examination weighed heavily on everyone's shoulders. Even at our private high school, we weren't exempt from tradition. The principal organized a pre-exam rally, inviting the top few students to speak about their study and exam experiences. Unsurprisingly, Jake and Leo, the typical top students, were chosen as representatives. I remember that rally being dreadfully boring. I only managed to stay awake until Jake's turn came, and after his eloquent speech, a few other classmates couldn't hold on any longer and quietly slipped out of the auditorium to stroll on the playground. I don't have any memory of Leo's speech. Maybe I missed it because I left early. Looking back, it feels a bit regrettable. Fortunately, I had a chance to relive it. This time, I made sure to stay fully alert, waiting for Leo to come on stage. However, after Jake finished speaking and the next speakers were already up, I still hadn't seen Leo's figure. Just then, an organizer from the student council walked by, and I grabbed their arm, asking, "Hey, do you know why Leo from our class hasn't come up?" "I haven't seen him either." The person frowned, their tone not very friendly. "He isn't answering his phone, and we had everything scheduled." "It's totally messed up. What's going on?" I suddenly realized that something might have happened. I jumped up and ran out of the auditorium. Where could he be? I took out my phone and called Leo. Just as the student council person had said, I called several times, but all went unanswered. The school was so big that I felt like a headless chicken running around between the classrooms. As I kept uselessly dialing Leo's number, I tried to reassure myself. He's not a little kid. He should be fine. Until I reached the playground, memories suddenly flooded back into my mind. I remembered. In my past life, after hearing Jake's speech, I had sneaked out of the auditorium to take a walk. As I walked toward the gym, I heard strange shouts and commotion. Driven by curiosity, I approached the window and saw several classmates from my class surrounding a boy, mercilessly punching and kicking him. They were cursing at him. At that moment, I didn't know why, but my sense of justice flared up. I pushed the door open. I pulled the boy away from them, saying, "If you bully him again, I'll tell the teacher." I even left those words with a fierce tone. Looking back now, that boy was Leo. I took off running. I dashed to the gym and slammed the door open. The scene before me was exactly the same as in my past life. Leo was surrounded in the middle with a few delinquents from our class, including Mike nearby. Isn't your family just in the coal mining business? Think you're special just because you study well? Still want to give a speech? I won't let you. I just can't stand your self-important attitude. What skills do you even have? After spending time with Leo, I realized that his environment in class was much harsher than I had imagined. In a school like ours, cliques formed easily, and Leo, with his gentle personality, having transferred here from a different school and coming from a poor background, didn't belong to any group. So he often faced exclusion. He even experienced bullying. In this world, he had me as a friend. I couldn't imagine how lonely his life must have been in my past life. Perhaps it was precisely because of this situation that he became particularly sensitive to even the slightest kindness. Maybe I just casually pulled him away from Mike's group, but it meant so much to him that he remembered it for so long. I wasn't afraid of Mike and his rich kid friends. When they saw me, they blocked my path. "Amelia, what are you doing playing the hero?" This was different from the previous scenario, especially since I might have come at the wrong time. The rally had ended and students were leaving. Some noticed the commotion here and peeked through the door. What? I don't remember it being such a big deal last time. Seeing the onlookers, Mike became even more excited. "Amelia, I've noticed something's off between you two. Are you two dating? If it were an ordinary student today, I wouldn't bully Leo so much. But it's you. Here's the deal. If you admit you like him, I'll apologize." Our school loves gossip. The surrounding students let out a synchronized "ooh." "Who is that?" "That's Amelia from class 4. And our top student." Leo stood up and tugged at my hand, his face pale. "Amelia," he smiled. "It's fine. Don't feel pressured. There are so many classmates here. What can he do to me?" "Don't feel pressured. There are so many classmates here. What can he do to me?" Though he said that, I really couldn't stand being provoked. "So, what if I like Leo?" I retorted, raising my voice. "Is it illegal to have a crush? Which school rule says we can't date?" Being straightforward wasn't that hard after all. Everyone probably didn't expect me to admit it so boldly. In an instant, there was silence. Even the cheers of the onlookers stopped. It was Mike who stuttered first. "Amelia, a heroine among women. What's going on? Gathering for trouble?" Suddenly, a sharp voice came from the back of the crowd. "We haven't even taken the entrance exam yet. Do you want to get a demerit?" The crowd instinctively parted to make way. The person approaching looked a bit familiar. I thought for a moment and realized it was the student council president. The president pointed at Mike and his gang, speaking sternly. "You're about to graduate and you're still bullying fellow students? Have you read the school rules? Don't you know we strictly prohibit bullying? Prohibiting bullying is one of the important rules at our school." Although in reality there are countless instances of students privately excluding those who are weaker, but it never escalated to the point where the school had to intervene. This time, Mike was going to be a typical example. The president pointed at each of them. You, and you all come with me to the office." After taking roll call, he turned to the people behind him and said, "Jake, I'll go tell the teachers about the situation." "Are you coming?" That's when I realized Jake had come with the student council president. He had been standing in the shadows, and I hadn't noticed. Jake shook his head, suddenly pointing at Leo. "Let Leo come too. After all, he's the one involved, and he can clarify things." The president nodded and waved his hand to take everyone away. Mike shouted, "Help! I don't want to see the head teacher." "That's not up to you," the president said, patting his head. The onlookers, seeing the main characters leave, knew the show was over and dispersed in a rush. I initially wanted to go with Leo and wait for him outside the office, but just a few steps down, someone suddenly grabbed my wrist. Jake looked at me, his expression serious. "Amelia, come with me." I then noticed his face was as pale as a sheet, his lips trembling slightly, as if he was suppressing some overwhelming emotion. What for? I asked softly. He pulled me close, not giving me a chance to refuse, and pushed me into a corner. Jake was much taller than me, and now he was so close that it felt oppressive. Amelia, he frowned, trying to steady his voice. I understand you wanted to help Leo today, but you could have called the teacher or called me. You didn't have to do it this way. Oh, I get it. He thought that my declaration of liking Leo today was just a temporary decision out of helpfulness. I laughed. Jake, you're mistaken. I'm not just being kind. I really like Leo. Hearing this, Jake seemed to be momentarily speechless. He stood there, stunned, not saying a word. After a moment, he showed a pained, anxious, and somewhat pitiful expression. Suddenly, he pulled out a torn letter from his pocket, carefully holding it up to show me, and asked, Amelia, you're lying to me, right? What did I do wrong? You can't possibly like Leo. If you did, how could you have written me a letter like this? You can't possibly like Leo. That was the love letter I wrote to Jake, but I had already torn it up and thrown it in the trash. I didn't understand how it ended up in Jake's hands. I looked at him in confusion. Jake gave a somewhat bitter smile and admitted without hesitation, yes, I dug it out of the trash. I admit I wasn't sure how much I liked you at the time, and I was afraid that dating in our senior year would affect my studies. But I never thought, Amelia, that you would like someone else. Seeing that letter, I actually felt a sense of relief. My secret crush on Jake was coming to an end, and that wasn't a bad thing. I snatched the letter from his hands, tore it into the smaller pieces, then opened the window behind me and threw it out. The shredded paper scattered in the wind, never to be pieced back together. Jake's expression changed, and he hurried to the window, gripping the frame with both hands. Leaning halfway out, he gritted his teeth and said, Amelia, you... Jake, from the moment I threw away that love letter, you should know I don't like you anymore. From now on, unless something important comes up, don't come looking for me. Like you said, we all need to focus on the college entrance exam and studying, right? The next day, as soon as I walked into the classroom, I felt all my classmates staring at me. Normally, I wasn't flustered. I sat down, opened my book, and started reading. But it was already self-study time, so where was Leo? I tapped my deskmate's hand and asked, Where's Leo? She teased me with a look. You don't know? Because of your outburst yesterday, Mike got caught by the school and is now a typical case of bullying. He has to give a public apology during self-study today. Leo is probably dealing with the fallout too. As we were talking, the class loudspeaker blared to life. The voice of the deputy principal came through. There has been a serious bullying incident at the school that has had a very negative impact, and it's necessary for the main offenders to make a profound apology. Mike and his cohorts looked like wilted eggplants, completely stripped of their usual bravado. Each one mumbled apologies. The classmates listening all lowered their heads, trying not to laugh. I couldn't hold it in and burst out laughing too. The deputy principal asked Leo if he accepted their apologies. Leo calmly replied, Honestly, I've never paid attention to them. He felt completely above them. No matter how arrogant they were, it didn't matter to him. I almost wanted to applaud him under the desk, but the next moment, he brought me into it. Amelia, I feel like I should be the one to confess. I like you. I was stunned. My deskmate spit out her drink, eyes wide, looking at me. Wow, you two are showing off your affection in front of the whole school. As a result, Leo and I each had to submit an apology, but at least we could hold hands openly around campus now. Though dating seemed like it would hinder studying, my boyfriend was the top student in our grade. How could I not make good use of such a significant boost? Difficult science problems became lively with Leo's company and explanations. The entire second semester of senior year seemed to pass less painfully. Time flew by. Then I suddenly realized I hadn't really noticed Jake in a while. He no longer stayed after class on Friday afternoons. Even when he passed by Leo and me on campus, he would quickly look away and walk past. It seemed he was truly following through on my earlier words and no longer disturbing me. The moment college entrance exam results were released, I was at an internet cafe, teaching Leo how to control minion waves. Suddenly, the class group chat exploded. Someone messaged, "Help! The college entrance exam results are out." Leo and I immediately abandoned our game, grabbed our phones, and entered our exam numbers. My score came out quickly, exceeding my usual performance by 30 or 40 points, an extraordinary achievement. I shouted in excitement and turned to check Leo's phone screen. There seemed to be a problem on his end. It looked serious. The result showed 0 points. My hands trembled as I quietly asked, "How is that possible? Did you forget to write your name or mess up your exam number?" Leo shook his head. His fingers slowly moved to a small line at the bottom of the screen. "Your ranking is now in the top 50 in the province. Please check the specific details soon." I squealed and hugged Leo. The guy next to us playing games took off his headphones, confused, and glanced at us. "What's got you so excited?" I blushed and lowered my voice. "Leo, which school do you want to apply to?" Leo smiled and ruffled my hair. "I'll decide with you." Later, a prestigious Southern university offered Leo a full scholarship and allowed him to choose his major. I got accepted to a nearby teacher's college. Everything seemed to be falling into place as planned, except for Jake. A few days before the deadline for submitting college applications, I suddenly received a call from Jake's father. "Amelia, can you do me a favor and persuade Jake to apply to University A as originally planned?" University A was the target school that had lowered its admission score for Jake. I then learned that Jake had not performed well on the exam and hadn't reached the admission line for the top national business schools. But with the 60 points from University A, he could still attend as initially planned. To be honest, I didn't quite understand why Jake's father called me. First, facing this situation, why was Jake hesitating to apply to University A, one of the top schools in the country? I couldn't comprehend it at all. Second, as an outsider, what could I possibly say to persuade him? But since he was an elder, it was hard for me to refuse his request. So, after hanging up, I called Jake. It rang for a long time before he picked up. After a moment of hesitation, I asked, "Jake, have you not decided which school to apply to yet?" Jake's voice sounded tired. "No." In that moment, I felt a surge of frustration. "What's wrong with you, class president? What are you thinking? If you don't go to University A, where will you go? With your abilities, don't you think it's a waste to settle for an ordinary key university?" I wasn't sure how harsh my words were, but for a while, Jake didn't respond. After a long pause, he finally said slowly, "Amelia, I'm afraid if I go too far, you'll forget about me. Amelia, I want to go to university in the same city as you." So that was really how he felt. "But Jake, it wasn't necessary. It really wasn't necessary," I said coldly. "Jake, if you do this, I will look down on you." "Are you saying we can't even be ordinary friends anymore?" Jake went to University A. Catherine passed her cultural exams and was admitted to a dance academy in the same city in the north. Leo and I were accepted to a university in the south. Everything turned out perfectly. There were no car accidents, no injuries, and no subsequent fires. Our families maintained a great relationship, celebrating together with several graduation banquets. The parents even said they would take us to the airport for our flights to school. At the airport, Leo and I were on one flight, while Jake and Catherine were on another. One was heading south, the other north. We said our goodbyes at the boarding gate. I linked my arm with Leo's and handed him a backpack. Catherine reached out to touch Jake's hand, but he subtly moved away, appearing cold and distant. He looked at me, opened his mouth, but in the end said nothing. I waved goodbye to them. "See you. Maybe it will be a long time before we meet again."